Yep.
Okay.
Are we good? As far as you understand, Tom,
Are you
we can
getting-
start.
Are you getting sound through the microphone?
Yes.
Well, I think you can start with your broadcast and then.
Okay, let's call the meeting to order. Roll call. Tim Hamilton is here.
Mike Schlossberg is here.
Phil Caribbean is here.
No one.
Peter Meskill here.
Okay, we have full board present, so we have a quorum, obviously. I'm gonna make a note. We have one issue of business for public hearing. That's the variance application. That we met about a week or so ago from the Robertsons. The question I have for the Robertsons, has there been any changes to what you're planning to do since the last time we met? Because we discussed all the things. And the board, do you have questions of them to remind you of things you want to know before we open for public comment? Rather than give a whole presentation again, we've done that. Is there any questions the board has for the applicants to remind us of what we're doing?
No.
Yeah.
There was in one of the letters that we just received, there was a comment about access from sunset.
Sunset Terrace.
Sunset Terrace. My understanding was you were not having access from sunset, or maybe you're pursuing sunrise. But you were pursuing it, but it wasn't part of the proposal. Is that right?
At this point, it is not our plan to access from Sunrise Terrace. From the center of the road.
Right. That's how that was my understanding. Okay, I just
That was
wanted-
my question as well, when I read a couple of letters that came in.
Can I add one comment?
Absolutely.
So the last one, there's some question about the impact, on the purpose area, to the area, and what the impact on the wetland might actually be. And so after the meeting, I went back to PG Miller, the name, civil engineers, and asked them to kind of weigh in. And the point they made was, if you take the portion of the roof line that becomes impervious and would naturally want to drain into the buffer zone, or we're talking about 1,500 square feet of impervious area. And if you take a significant rain event, 1 to 2 inches of rain, and you look at what that's feeding into in terms of wetland, that's 15 acres of wetland. If you aggregate the couple types of wetland, they're all contiguous in that area. And their feedback was, it's not totally, you can't totally, it's so minimal. And the amount of impervious area is into the wetland.
You're talking 1,500 feet is the square footage of the roof?
Correct.
Okay. And if all the water off the roof,
It's the
all of
square
it.
footage of half of the roof, or which portion of the roof line?
The front of the roof line is not drained buffer. That whole half of the house isn't inside of the buffer, it's inside of the buffer. And so
Right.
that naturally wants to be daylighted out to the front of the house. The back half of the roof line is what we're talking about. And the other comment, and we didn't go into great detail because they just thought that it was so minimal in terms of the impact, but it's also being drained into a turf area, which the lawn area is, in sense, the filter exposes the water coming down minimal grade. Not all the water actually makes it to the wetland, and the water that does go through the filter. In the sense that lawn area does filter out some of the contaminants that might be introduced to the water by virtue of landing on it.
Where did the number 15 acres, where did you arrive at that?
The national wetland map for the federal wetland map. You can go on there.
Okay.
There's two types of wetland. I'm not going to pretend to recite the names of them. It's a PF01 and
I mean,
PF0.
so are you saying that's this entire wetland area here that we're using?
Correct. If you were to, and then actually you can, if you go on there, basically click on it, it'll tell you exactly what the acreage is of each wetland. And so I just went on there, some of those, and use that as a basis for my conversation.
I'm sorry, did you see if that microphone's on? No. Could you? Well, or, all right, I'm gonna try to figure out. It's in
It's on the
back.
bottom,
Little
Bottom at the bottom.
Okay.
Now repeat everything.
No. So in summary, you went to TG Miller and asked them, we have approximately 1,500 feet of roof that would drain directly into the wetlands in,
It would drain into the lawn area.
okay, but the direction of the wetlands.
Correct.
As opposed to the part of the roof that would not go in the direction of the wetlands. And with a hard rain of 2 inches, they didn't feel it would make, it's not calculable the impact it would make on 15 acres.
No, I mean, 1,500 versus, I think 15 acres, like 650,000 square feet. And so the point was, it's like 100 or it's 1,000 of an inch in that circumstance. And so their comment to me was, it's not really anything that can quantify.
And let's again be clear, this is not in the buffer, in the wetland itself, it's in the buffer.
Of the wetland.
And neither the DEC or Army Corps require a buffer. They deal solely with the designated wetlands.
So their interest, as you talked with them, was only if something is actually in the wetlands, do they want to have weigh in on it?
Or, discharging water effluents, what have you, into that wetland.
They're considering the buffer as not being something they're going to weigh in on as,
They're considering the village very nice because we have put a buffer into our zoning ordinance.
Okay.
Both the DEC and Army Corps of Engineers do not take buffers into their consideration.
they haven't created buffers, they've simply delineated the actual wetlands.
And that's what both of those emails you sent us
Right.
indicated.
Right,
One from the DEC rep we spoke with and one from the Army Corps of Engineers.
Right.
And then there were some recommendations at the bottom, the runoff water diverted away from the wetland. And another suggestion, infrequent mowing without pesticide use and those things.
Yeah, that was the DEC's
Recommendation.
recommendation.
Right.
Mhm.
There are no DEC wetlands in the entire area.
Right.
They're only the federal wetlands.
Right.
The person from from Army Corps did not have any recommendations about best practice for that situation.
so the conclusion, maybe that's the conclusion. The conclusion of the matter of the buffer zone is a village ordinance on its own, not a state mandated, you need to have a buffer zone in addition to wetlands
State or federal.
or federal.
Yeah.
So that buffer zone, because we were talking about that the last meeting, who created the 100-foot buffer zone? Is it based on some state legislation, like so many things we do are based on, but this is more home rule.
Right.
Home rule decided, let's put in a 100-foot buffer zone, okay. And then they put in place the opportunity for a zoning board to give a variance related to that buffer zone by the rule of home rule.
Question for Tom. I don't know if this came up, but did DEC or Army Corps talk about what threshold they would get involved if there was a runoff situation going towards that? Not necessarily in, because you said they can govern if there's a boundary issue, like if you're developing within the wetland. But also, I would imagine they're concerned about runoff into that wetland, development off-site. Is there some threshold?
Yeah, we didn't go into specifics on that, but if there's a measurable discharge coming from outside of the wetland into the wetland.
Right, okay. Which is hard to quantify again, and maybe
Well-
to their point, it may not be quantifiable, what we're talking about here. In my mind, quantifiable discharge might be big parking lot and runoff and a pipe that's obvious. Well,
Where they've created an effluent that's going toward the wetlands and reaches the wetlands.
right, not just.
Yeah.
Or you could have a septic system and put the spill on that.
Right.
In that direction, you know, the health department will, if they have to put in a septic system, will be very, very careful about that. Make sure it's outside the buffer, any leach fields or filters will be outside of that buffer.
Right. So in your conversations with the Army Corps and DEC, in their mind, are people able to build in wetlands if they then meet certain criteria of how they handle water?
I didn't go there.
I've just,
I could speak to that a little bit. I mean, typically, if you're building in a wetland, you have to replace the wetland. Normally, it's like 2 to 1. So if you disturb an acre of the wetland, you have to build 2 acres of wetland somewhere else.
So apparently, all the houses built down on Prospect Street were done either before this revision was made to the zoning ordinance or was done in total disregard.
you're talking about the apartments, those,
Everything. There's single family on one side of the road and there's apartments on the other side of the road.
yeah. I remember when the apartments were done.
I remember when all was done.
No, I mean, I remember, I think some
Then
that
it
came
kept
before
growing.
zoning,
Well, this is kind of newer, isn't it? Newer? The wetlands overlay.
I mean, this
That's
zoning
like
ordinance is
2012,
2012, right? 2012.
I think the zoning, this district was created in 2012.
yeah.
I don't know.
Probably most of them prior to that.
Yes, the apartments maybe after, or the ones on the back part.
On the back part.
Those were maybe after that.
That's about it.
The Ostick, I think, built those.
Yes.
Okay,
That side.
all right. Not before mine. Oh, I'm on the board since 2004, I think, but.
It's worth noting though, that I don't think the DEC shuts down the village when they drive their salt truck through and salt the road that runs right through the middle. Of the
Yeah.
island.
Right. Okay, so any more questions of them about the application? I want to be able to open for public comment and at least get that part going here without greater delay, and then we'll continue our discussion, but any more right now?
No, not for me.
Can I have a motion to open up the public comment?
I'll move to open public comment.
Okay. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, the same? Motion carries. Anybody here to make public comment? Yeah, has everybody read the letters at least? There's a copy of them
Couple times.
here. Okay,
I did.
everybody read those? Okay. Can I have a motion to close public comment?
I'll make a motion to close public comment.
Okay. Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carried. There are 5 factors to take into consideration in an area variance. I'll just mention what the 5 factors are. Undesirable neighborhood change. Does it change the character of the neighborhood itself? Can the benefit be achieved by another feasible method? Is the variance substantial? Are there adverse environmental impacts? And is the situation self-created? Let's talk about the first one, undesirable neighborhood change. The concerns that were raised in the letter about an access from that property off of Sunrise Terrace is probably a neighborhood change if they were going to pursue and do that. I don't know what the rules are to connecting from a village street onto your property. Is there any hoops that have to go through when that is done?
If
They would have to
they,
cross the neighboring
they
property.
got a cross property that's not there, so without a legal
That's what I
right away
was
and
assuming.
approval of that first owner, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, because they don't have direct access to that road. It
Correct.
doesn't touch your property.
And the other thing I would just point out from an undesirable neighborhood change, when I saw those letters, I pulled my map back out and looked at it. On each side of Sunrise Terrace, there are 2 vacant, well, it's in one tax map, but could easily be subdivided by the planning board here, would be 2 buildable size lots in the village because there is public sewer there. So that would have more of an impact, and there's nothing that the ZBA could do about that.
Right.
Than somebody building a single family, even if they were able to buy access to put a driveway. It's just built
The
as
house
a
is
residential
also
neighborhood,
quite
actually
close
built.
to that space too, so they, I mean, they can build quite far back, close to the wetland, which would be, still be very close to Sunrise Terrace, so. I mean, I don't think that I don't think the zoning, like what we're changing is significant in relation to the character of Sunrise Terrace.
Right.
Right. But as you're pointing out, there's already vacant lots there, and they're buildable if someone chose to buy those lots and build homes. It's gonna change the
Available
character.
for even sale. Archie is trust owned that land. from God,
I think it's really hard to say that building a house in the neighborhood is undesirable.
Right.
Thing in the
Right.
neighborhood.
No, that's a-
Big house.
We've dealt with that on numerous occasions around the village and,
It's a personal issue, not a-
yeah. If you want a lot of land around your house, you have to buy it. If you want a lot of space around your house. Okay. Any other neighborhood changes we see that are going to be affected other than those that were raised in the letter? Okay. All right. Let's talk about, can the benefit be achieved by another feasible method?
Yes. I mean, they can build.
They can move the house
Move
forward.
around.
You can move it forward. Okay. Is the variance substantial?
I would think yes. 'Cause-
50%.
Yeah.
More.
I think there's a couple different ways to look at it. I think just mathematically it's substantial, but in terms of the impact as they describe and as the DEC weighed in, it's hard to substantial. I don't know, I guess the question, what does that mean? Substantial.
I think part of it is, should I be speaking?
You can speak.
This is.
We don't have to
my-
listen.
My opinion as zoning officers look at this situation, is the village has established this 100-foot buffer. And that is, if anybody desires to do something within that buffer, then it has to come in front of the board to be considered. It is not what's it, imaginary line where you cannot cross it.
Right.
It does mean that you folks have to come to, in front of the board, present the situation, and the board needs to consider it and make sure that it's not going to have a detrimental effect on the buffer or the wetland or the nature of the housing in the village.
I guess I would tend to agree with kind of what I think Noel was going with this conversation, is that overall impact on the land or the zone itself from a quality of life and the quality of life of the environment is a minimal thing considering the amount of land we're talking about to build one house.
Exactly. The major issue here is the environmental issue, which is number 4 of the 5 factors and not the others. Because this is a buffer zone of a wetland, this is not a neighbor setback.
Right.
You know, this is not a person wants to do a home business that involves a lot of trucking, you know, and things like that. Those are different, where the 5 issues then become important issues. In my mind, only number 4 is the critical issue, and the others, as has been said, are more very ancillary. Because you know, if there was not a buffer zone, there would be no issue at all as far as where they could put their house based on their land. If there was not a wetlands and a buffer zone, they can put the house anywhere they want, as long as they maintain the setbacks, which is 5 feet side yards, 15 feet backyard, 50-foot front yard. I mean, other
They
than
couldn't put
that,
it in the wetland.
what?
They couldn't put it in the.
Well, I'm saying if there wasn't a wetland at all, they could put their house anywhere on the
That's true.
property. The wetland says you have to have a buffer zone, and that's an environmental issue, not a how close are you to the neighbor issue.
I mean, but the wetland is established by the federal government.
Exactly.
The buffer is established by the village.
By us.
So it's a village decision at that time to decide to.
So I think
So
that
whomever came up with that zoning ordinance thought the buffer was at least should be considered
Yes.
in the discussion.
Yes, but again, so when you talk about substantial, the 100 foot was an arbitrary number that the village established, not based on anything we've heard from Army Corps of Engineers or DEC, that says, you should have at least a 100 foot buffer zone. And people's feelings about it is not really relevant. Neighbors' feelings about it. It's an environmental, so it's kind of a yes or no. What's the direction? So we talked last week about, or a week and a half ago about the contour of the land is probably as critically important as anything else we talk about. Is which direction is water going? Is there, like has been said, is there a filter lawn that will prevent water from moving the 50 feet or whatever the number ends up being to the wetlands and things like that? And the size of the structure and the amount of water coming off of it.
There's no requirement for them to maintain that buffer in any particular way, is there either? Like, I mean, it could be grassy lawn if they wanted to cut,
I think there could be through, I don't know if it's through this or through a plan, they have to go to the plan.
Right.
to build there, they have to go through, but essentially, like, right now, they could go in there and cut everything out and make it into lawn.
Oh, I see.
If they wanted,
Without
right?
even-
There's no requirement in the zoning ordinance that the buffer is maintained in some natural
Yes,
state,
yes.
right? Is that?
Only if they changed it through some kind of construction. I
Right.
think if they put in a driveway, they put in a parking area,
Right,
gravel. We've dealt with that issue before of people putting in parking areas and what does zoning say about that? They put in a tennis court back there and paved a nice big tennis court.
but if they wanted to log it or just make it lawn, right, which would maybe be detrimental to the wetland itself as putting a house in would be,
If it's in the
much-
wetland itself, that
No.
would fall under the Army Corps.
No, we're
Yeah, but
talking in
up
the
to
buffer zone.
We're talking the buffer.
What can people do in the buffer zone that doesn't include building a structure on?
I'm sorry, I didn't bring my copy of the zoning ordinance, but you can have trails, you can have a park. bench.
In the buffer zone?
I think even as far as a lean to, insubstantial structures.
Without asking.
I don't think we have.
You said this is in the zoning?
Yeah, I can find it fairly quickly. if you want.
Whether it's in there or not, though, isn't there some mechanism, should we, before council decide to put some restrictions on what they can?
I think if there's something in the zoning that goes more specific, then I think those become factors to consider. If the zoning doesn't address it at all, and he's saying it does, I didn't.
What I'm saying is, I think.
Yes, yes, yes.
But again, I feel like it's more time for it.
So I agree, that's their main focus other than.
Right, we can put conditions upon a variance, which would guide the planning board. Which is say, we're gonna allow the variance based on conditions A, B, and C. And meaning planning board, you have to include that in your discussion. And it might be the direction water is removed from the roof. We could put that in if we feel that's a critical level of this environmental impact.
Or what activities we want to see within.
Right.
Boy, I think that's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Telling, because
Yeah.
there's people right there on Sunrise up from the Multi land. And we're out the guys
Doing
moving out all year.
Who's gonna enforce it too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
is Tom gonna go out there once
You're
a
gonna be
year and
mowing
say, oh,
leaves.
you
Yeah.
mowed too close to
Be
the.
very careful for that.
The planning board can approve it with conditions. The Gene Foley from DEC said sometimes in circumstances like what we do, the board puts in a condition where it's only mowed, in the buffer area 3 times a year. Or we like to encourage people to plant shrubberies, just so it's clear that you're not gonna maintain your nice little short lawn with lots of herbicide, what have you. But once again, that's her recommendation. The planning board, not us, could say, okay, we'll approve the site plan with XYZ conditions. So
And we could leave that to them.
I agree.
So they say, yeah, I mean, so they say normal ground maintenance, including mowing and trimming of vegetation. So I think, I mean, you could mow it, I mean, you could cut all the trees out and mow it as lawn.
I mean, unless you put in a putting green that's that short that maybe sheds water. I don't, does the height of the grass make that big a difference on where the water goes?
I mean, it will certainly slow.
Yeah.
Doesn't?
Slower speed flow of water.
Yeah,
My lawn just creates a pond and, so I don't mow it until
But
it's
keep in
dry.
mind, like with this,
Chlorinated.
the topographic map has a natural lean that goes
Hmm.
down towards Prospect and a little bit over towards Seneca.
So as I'm looking at this map that we were given,
Mhm.
so is the topographic map showing that the water is moving away from the house?
It's right here on
Is
the-
that right?
it's right on
Are those
the-
numbers
right on
the
attachment.
elevation numbers?
Yeah.
So the house is at like 940, whatever that is.
It's moving forward.
And then it goes to 940, 938, 936, 934, 932. Are those the elevation numbers? That's how we're to read that.
That's the topographical elevation.
Yeah, so
Okay.
they're sort of on the highest spot.
Yeah, yeah.
House.
So if water is diverted toward the front of the house, it's going to naturally move out of the buffer zone and into the area in front.
Correct.
Do you see any major adverse environmental impacts from putting a house there? Where do we see it?
This is the question, how do you quantify it? And I
yeah.
think it's really hard to describe it as major.
I also agree that, I mean, I guess I don't think it will be major based on the fact that like the buffer is, I mean, can be anything. Like, I think if it were a specific like mix of diverse plants that might like filter water, et cetera, but the fact that it could just be cut into lawn sort of really, I think, reduces the effects that putting a house close to the, in there, in my opinion anyways.
They define the buffer zone as not being aggressive in stopping water.
I guess,
In
I
our
mean, it
definition.
seems like from the definition in the zoning, like it is really more just a space in between the wetland and where you can build, but it doesn't seem like it's
It's more
having
linear
a
space than,
significant like impact on, stopping water from running directly into the.
if a wetland exists because it's wet, why do we not want water going into
I
it?
think what?
Contaminant.
Because of contaminants in the water.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not, the wetland can't handle it, it's more of where
Okay.
it's coming from, what is.
And it tends to stay there,
Right. So if this is a parking lot that they're salting all winter and that water is draining salt into that, that would affect the plant life that's there.
Sort of like Sunrise Terrace.
Yes, this the turnaround.
Right, right,
The village
right.
salt.
Right, okay. And
But it's a minimal.
they're not gonna put anything, if they put a driveway in, it's gonna be in the front end of the property that goes away from there anyway.
I think this is why it's hard to call it major, because it's relative to what's already happening. It's
Right.
It's just part of the neighborhood, honestly.
for better or worse. It's just not.
Any more points people want to make, or are we ready to at least walk through officially the 5 things and make some determinations? In my mind, the determination on number 4 is the most critical, regardless of the other determinations. Sometimes, 5th one, it's always a self-created problem, and that's not an issue. Sometimes if you get the wrong answer on the others, it can make a real issue, but I personally think number 4 is the critical issue.
Well, I think 3, I mean, I think 3 could be, I mean, I guess the number is significant, but I don't think the impact on the actual wetland is significant in terms of.
I think I would agree. I mean, just based on that 100-foot number, but, from what I'm beginning to understand, I mean, it wasn't completely arbitrary, but it was a number that was set a while ago, right? And I know, just like doing a little bit of research, I know that there's a bit of variation between what other villages in New York State do. Some do it, they don't have it at all. Some have like around 50 feet. So, I do think it's substantial to the number, but to environmental impact, I am not really seeing it.
So the only other point I've sort of made it, but it feels like weird, right, to just have a rule and just ignore it, not ignore it. We're talking it through, but you know what I mean, like just, it seems weird to just allow it in this situation without really strong justification and or mitigation. And I know it's hard to quantify, but I feel like there should be some sort of trade-off. And I don't know what that looks like, and that may be more passing it out of the planning board, but I'm happy to discuss what that.
Okay.
Are you thinking in terms of like shrubs in the backyard or the,
Yeah, describing
runoff.
what is allowed to happen in the buffer more strongly than what the current zoning does, or just a land area swap. You know, maybe there's an area looking at the topographic map, maybe there's a more logical area that makes a stronger buffer because of the way the land slopes towards it.
See, I would respectfully disagree, because if that was the case, then really what should happen is the zoning should be changed, and the zoning should be clear to say, if zoning variance is allowed within the buffer, regardless of what your buffer is, then it's acceptable for us to negotiate, mitigate situation.
The condition.
where you play, you know, A for B. Otherwise, I don't know really from a legal development standpoint, especially if it's a personal building, how much we would be overstepping bounds in zoning ordinance versus the planning board coming up with whatever they do for the planning sketch and the building mitigation. To me, that sounds like the ideal spot for any building mitigation.
It may just be a recommendation. from the
Yeah, I mean, but,
board.
and I think also like the part of the problem is like, is enforcement, like. I agree that it would be very nice to maintain some kind of like vegetative buffer between the wetland and the house, but like. In 5 years, like, I mean, when Tom's gone, and this is like, you know, a side note on some zoning ordinance, like
Right.
that, you know. Who, I mean, not that you're not gonna be here forever, like, you know, so. So I mean, like, I guess it just enforcing that gets to be a little bit tricky too, like.
Yeah, but that's
And
true of every law that we have. They all have to enforce.
One of the things that because I've been on the board for so long, one of the things that happens in the process of time is when an issue comes before the board and then it comes again and again and again. And at one point we dealt with sheds, like 6 in a row where sheds could be placed on the property. And we gave every single variance because we realized that the zoning law itself was maybe not as well thought through. And I think they're changing that in the new zoning revision, because the zoning board faced an issue that resident after resident after resident says, we think this is unfair and this is what we want to do. And the zoning board was the first line of defending the village residents of what they want to do, in a sense, to a law that was enacted at one time, that it takes a long process to change our laws. And that's why we have variances, because it takes a long time to change a law. So I'd like us to walk through the 5 determinations and come to an answer on each of those. And then we can, within a single determination, we could say, we would like to make this recommendation within that determination. We want to make a recommendation, or we want to set a condition, and we could do that on each of these as we walk through, as opposed to voting on them and then coming back and saying, let's do a condition. If we want one to attach to environmental impact or substantial variance or undesirable neighborhood change, we'll do that at that stage.
can I just ask, like, Noah, like, what would you see? Something looking like, you know, I mean, what specifically would you specify?
Yeah, I think a practice of not mowing or not mowing more than 3 times would make sense, 2 times a year kind of thing. Or I haven't studied it that closely, but the idea of just swapping of land area. So we're allowing this area to be within the buffer, but they own so much of that area that we easily swap an equivalent on that.
What do you say swap? Like, then a different spot would become buffer, but the,
Shaped boundary line. So the buffer is a boundary line now.
but that would imply that they're reshaping the wetland to create the buffer. Right, I mean, you'd have
Even
to,
though we would be reshaping the buffer, not the wetland itself.
but the buffer is is defined by the wetland.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
100 feet is still sort of arbitrary.
I think one of the things you were mentioning was changing the wetland space available because people are in the wetland. I'm not sure you can do that to the buffer. You know, what you're saying is this part of the buffer is 50 feet from the wetland and this part is 150 feet from the wetland.
Right.
That-
That's what I'm saying, but I don't know.
I don't know that that helps anything.
And I'm also not saying that we would do it. It would be whatever it is, a recommendation that the planning board study this or look at this.
That's exactly what I was gonna say, and I think it should be not a condition, but a recommendation to the
Yeah.
planning board. The condition then is a much more legal term and has whole different consequences to
Right,
our actions.
right.
And or,
Well, then they can't.
usually it would be Article 7.
They can't then, they can't go against a condition we set. Once our condition is set, planning board can't change that.
More of a-
They could only come back to us and appeal it and then we would
But
change.
if we use the word recommendation,
Exactly,
then that gives them the leeway to do what I think is their job.
right.
And it signifies to them
Here's the
that
issue.
we have some concern about this, or that,
Okay.
you know, hopefully you can have a discussion.
Personally, I would like the planning board to look at the issue of just the direction water off the roof is funneled. I mean, when you talk
That's the
about
biggest
not
issue.
mowing it, you know, 4 times a year, that's something you have to keep checking up on. But if you tell them where the gutters have to go and how it has to feed off the building, once they're built, they're there. You're not addressing it anymore. No water's coming off that roof, or a mitigated, a great amount of water coming off that roof is not going, dumping into the buffer zone.
Until the gutters fall
Well, until,
Well, but that is, I mean, an engineering control is going to work until it doesn't, and then if the gutters fall off in the house, it's gonna rot eventually anyway, so.
right. So, to me, that's something that you don't have to
Not in our lifetime.
maintain observational compliance.
Yeah.
You do something that says right up, it's like in the building, you know, in construction, you have to put up those fences to stop, you know, water from moving. You put them up, they're up during construction. When construction is done, they take them down. It's a permanent thing there that you can see has been done, as opposed to something we're asking Tom to drive by, you know, 4 times in the summer just to check. You know, in a summer like this, when it was a drought, nobody mowed. But in the summer, like, you know, a couple of years ago,
The year before.
you hoped you could mow through the water.
Well, the thought was not to mow 4 times, and it's, you want to mow 4 or less or 3 or
Right,
less.
right.
But you realize right now, as the land exists, it's thicket and trees. It's
Yeah.
hard to walk through some of it.
A lot of the buffer is.
Which is a great buffer.
Area is the note here.
Yes.
You know, as is situation.
All right, so we can walk through the 5 factors?
Yeah.
Factor number 1, will an undesirable neighborhood change be made? I say no.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
Okay, answer's no. Can the benefit be achieved by another feasible method?
Yes.
Yes,
I think it can.
I think yes, you know.
Depends on how you find that.
Yeah. What
I mean, they
benefit
could
to
just-
whom?
They could build a house there, right? They have plenty of space to put.
Right, right. You know, my comments earlier were, I believe it's yes, but my comments earlier were, if this wasn't a buffer zone issue, they could put their house in many places because they're meeting all the other criteria of setbacks. So, so the answer is yes, but
Still,
I don't know that.
if there weren't zoning, they could put it wherever they want.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. Is the variance substantial? How do you want to answer that?
I don't believe it is. Again, that's the whole issue of the plan versus the placement of the house and the amount of land they already own, and the fact that there's no other. The issue is the buffer zone that the village arbitrarily put together, what, 10, 12 years ago?
I also don't think that it's just going from 100 to 50. It's, yeah, sure, that's fine, but it's an area.
Right.
What's the total area of the buffer?
Right,
And they're touching.
right.
Right. So
Right.
That's in terms of areas.
I think in terms of its environmental impact, it's the variance I think is not substantial.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree.
Right, the ability to drive right through the entire length of the buffer. That's
That'd be different.
Yeah, building a road through a buffer zone. Okay, variance is substantial. No. Adverse environmental impacts, is the answer the same based upon the size of this structure and the size of the wetlands and in this answer to adverse environmental impacts, do we want to make some recommendations related to adverse environmental impact. I say the impact is not substantial, the adverse environmental impact, but I would recommend to the planning board that they would consider the movement of water off the roof away from the wetlands. I would make that as a recommendation. If you want to make a recommendation as versus plantings or something related actually to the land around the house, that's,
I would be in favor of defining, well, what is the resulting buffer after?
how much area is buffer?
You gotta measure it.
50 feet.
Yeah, it's,
And I'm assuming you're gonna want some sort of lawn around the house. To some degree, right?
Most of the buffer is currently long.
And it's current.
I mean, based on the fact that like, yeah, it's not going to be just like. The buffer can be long, and if, you know, that was my concern, was that they were gonna be pulling out a bunch of like native stuff and then putting in essentially like just a flat green lawn, which that's already there maybe, and also they can do that anyways, whether or not they built a house. Makes me think that it's not a adverse effect on the conditions in the neighborhood. And I do agree with your conditions that, you know, water needs to be, I mean, that consideration by the planning board that water is diverted from the roof away from the wetland, I think is a good one, as well as like maybe some agreement that they'll, you know, mow it less or something. I don't know, or some small portion of it. I don't know, but even then, it's like, well, that's already in the zoning. You're not allowed to spray pesticide in the buffer zone to the
Yeah,
wetland.
maybe
So
less of an issue. The one thing I would say about your first condition is I don't know if it needs to be so strongly worded that no water. Because I don't know if the gutters are gonna work that way or whatever. I think it may be more of a little bit further analysis from like T.G. Miller or somebody to make a professional recommendation to the satisfaction of the planning board.
well, but that's, I mean, I guess that is right. That's kind of, I mean, we're making a recommendation to the planning board
To consider the
Exactly.
issue.
I don't want
Consider
to
the
come
issue.
across so strong.
No, no.
No
Okay.
water shall fall into.
Yeah.
I think you could come across by saying the majority of the water.
Yeah.
I mean, you're already looking at about half the roof, is something correct, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you had to split the gutter system where one went one way and one went to the back, you could do that depending on the length of the house. It wouldn't look outrageous. It's done with a tilt bags, done on the front of my front porch of my house.
So our recommendation would be that the planning board consider that the majority of the water from the roof be diverted away from the wetlands.
Yes.
Right.
I'd be
Yeah,
happy with that
agreed.
word.
Or the wetland buffer.
The wetland, yeah, the wetland.
Well, the wetlands,
And to be clear, just. it's
because the
not just-
buffer is what the buffer is exactly supposed to do, is buff from the wetland, so.
Right.
And to be clear, not just the roof, but the driveway and front surface.
And prevent any-
Seems like it's not an issue. but-
Any channelized flow, right, in the direction. of wetland.
Impervious surfaces be diverted away from the wetlands. So we'd like the planning board to consider that a majority of the water from impervious surfaces be diverted away from the wetland.
That'd be our recommendation.
Okay. And so we're saying no to adverse environmental impact. Our answer is no with that recommendation. Is that correct?
That's correct for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
No?
This may,
Okay. All right. Is the problem self-created? Yes. Any objection to that?
Yeah,
Okay. Or we could blame the person who created the wetland.
right, that's why.
or the top.
Or the topographical map, or who wrote the ordinance. No, let's not go there. Okay.
What glacier moved dirt?
All right. Can I have a motion based upon the 5 factors?
Yeah, I would move that we approve the variance based on those factors in our recommendation to the planning board.
Okay, Pete makes a motion that we approve the variance with the recommendation to the planning board about water diversion.
I'll second Pete's motion.
Okay, Phil seconds it. Discussion. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Okay, no, Phil, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same. Motion carries. We are adjourned.